welcome again. My name is Anna Wilde-Johannes, and I am the Program Manager at Early Care Educators of San Francisco. We're so excited to have you join us tonight, and we encourage you to introduce yourself and share comments in the chat throughout the presentation. We will have opportunities for questions throughout the presentation and invite you to unmute to ask, or you can drop any questions in the chat and I will read them to the group. As many of you know, March is Women's History Month, and today is Women's Equal Pay Day. It's time to reflect on the impact women have had on the world. It's also the perfect time to learn about women who have shaped the history of caregiving as we know it today, highlighting the contributions of Black, Brown, and Indigenous women in the field. So before we begin, I would like to introduce Jody Becker, a fierce ECE advocate who is here to provide us with a grounding and land acknowledgement to honor the Indigenous tribes native to the land where we live and work. Thank you, Jody.
Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you, Anna. For tonight's grounding, I'd like to offer an invitation to move some energy through our bodies. So you may want to just give a little stretch, kind of reach up a little bit if that feels good. Maybe a little rub on your arms, kind of get some blood flowing again, or a little hug. Give yourself a little hug or a stretch or a wiggle. Maybe a little shake any sort of buzz from earlier in the day. A little shoulder shimmy, bring us back in, and we'll just take a big breath together. We'll just get one more in there, one big breath. We're calling in this evening from all across the Bay and beyond, and we'd like to take this moment to recognize the Indigenous stewards of the lands on which we reside, as well as the vitality, struggles, and full humanity of our First Nations people, past, present, and future. If you know the name of the tribes native and present in your city, feel free to share it in the chat now. We acknowledge this country was built from the enslaved labor of African people. We name the debt owed to Black life and Black joy and seek to honor the legacy of the African diaspora. In light of recent attacks and persistent atrocities at the border and throughout the pandemic, we also want to uplift our Asian and Latin American families and colleagues and hold them close as we work to disrupt the hate, violence, and injustices perpetuated against these communities and other communities of color every day. As educators, we recognize the importance of sharing diverse stories and perspectives, of building community and compassion across differences, and affirming the worth and personhood of every child, family, and colleague in our communities. Please join me in a collective pause for the Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latin ancestors who have passed and who endure, who continue to pave the way for us all, and for whom we commit to creating a more just and loving world for young children and ourselves. Thank you.
So are we ready to begin? Any other intro?
I get to introduce you, and I'm very honored to do that. Let me start with appreciating Jody for grounding us, Anna for welcoming us, and for Andres and Truline for supporting and communicating across 3 languages. I'm Sarah Hicks Kilday and appreciate each of you for being part of Early Care Educators of San Francisco tonight. And before we end tonight, be sure to download the interest form dropped in chat and share it with every educator you know at a site in San Francisco, centers and family child care, so we can further connect with you and more educators in our work, including in our teacher forums, educator conversations, and as collaborators, allies, and coalition partners, all shaping a strong program for the change we need to make the lives of caregivers and the practice of caregiving magnificent. I also appreciate each of you and your ongoing commitment to making work with children and families joyous, rewarding, transformational, and full of sustenance. As you work to support a child who's having a hard day, figure out how to keep your program afloat during COVID, or to understand the daily changing rules, as you support a colleague, yourself or your family to keep going another day, as you work to access more resources for ECE through Prop C or F or from the state or federal CARES package, all of that. And I've come together with many of you to talk about and advocate for just these sorts of very important things. And tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to someone who will bring something to you a little different than usual, something that can open up your imagination, our imagination together. How would our world be different if caregiving and vital life-giving work were centered, were the priority work in our community, deeply valued, respected, and recognized as full of the kind of knowledge that is needed to be part of community leadership and decision-making? If service was not seen as servile, but understood as life-giving and community building, not idolized, but respected and understood, valued and resourced. I think about this all the time, and I'm sure you do too. When I was hanging out with lots of 2-year-olds and they asked about the rules to a game, sometimes I'd answer, well, a game is a set of rules the group of people playing agrees upon. So let's make the rules. What rules do you think we should agree on? For a moment, let's look at our current social structure as a game we're all playing together and pretend or believe that we can change the rules and make the things better. Let's imagine that we can make change. I was introduced to Max Dashu via a radio talk show. As someone who went to college and walked into class, anthropology or such, and told the professors she'd like to study the cultures where women were leaders, matricultures, and she was told they never existed. So she left college and developed her own research. Now 50 years of research of social structures where life-giving responsibilities are centered and given more than lip service, so that those who actually do this crucial work are accorded authority and decision-making power because of it. I am so excited to introduce Max Dashu to offer her research to you as such an important piece of our thinking about caregiving and how to change the rules. Please welcome Max Dashu, founder of the Suppressed Histories Archives. And as I turn the mic over, I'll drop the interpretation guidelines again in case there have been more joiners who need to know that instruction. Thank you, Max, for being here. And thank you for your time in creating this presentation.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for inviting me. I am about to go over to screen share, but I just wanted to add my recognition that I am webcasting here to you from the lands of the Chochenyo Ohlone, the Lishan Ohlone Confederacy, and pay respects to that people and their ancestors. All right, so let me just switch over here a minute so I can do screen share. Oops, didn't do that right. Try it again. This is always tricky because you have to do it in just the right order. Share screen, here we go. Oops, I'm disabled from screen sharing here, kids. So you got to make me a host for me to be able to do that. Should I try again? Tell me when you're ready.
Okay, I'm looking for. There you go. You should be able to do it. Try it now.
Nope. Okay. Oh, here we go.
Got it? Okay.
All right, so this, and then go to PowerPoint and do this. There we go. That's how it's supposed to work. All right, yeah. So this is a kind of a custom visual talk that I put together at the request of ECE. And what I want to focus on here is I deal with suppressed histories all the time, and there's nothing more suppressed from the view of what we're taught as history than mothers, social mothering, not just within the family, but across the entire societies and villages, and the way that children are cared for, the way that children are taught. And so I'm going to give an overview of that. And then we're going to go in a little bit later to look a little bit at matricultural societies and different models that are more egalitarian than what many of us are used to in the dominant society here. but just beginning by looking across a whole swath of social roles that people play. Caregivers as teachers and storytellers, really what they do is building community. It's developing the potential and the inspiration for children to grow and learn and become who they are. They act as counselors, they manage conflict. Sometimes they're healers. They set examples. Some of them are elders, some of them are the same generation. They solve problems for the children very often in the course of their work. And so guiding children to lead through fun, play as learning, getting to experiment, to discover who they are in themselves, to cooperate with each other, to sing, to make art, to dance, and to work as a team. But we really begin at the ground foundation, the caregiving of mothers themselves. And this is something, we have a paradox where mothers are given lip service, but often are really not given or accorded authority in the societies that they contribute to. Everything rests, the mothers hold it all up. All of human society is held up by the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties, because that's social motherhood. It's not just the nuclear family. And yet, very often are denied power, decision-making power in the society, even though they are the foundation of it. And if we look around the world, we'll see all kinds of modes, knowledge of caregiving, of massaging babies for their health, for their development. It's that contact with the eyes, with touch, with movement, with song to the child that enables it, especially the eye contact, enables the baby to develop, to grow their consciousness, and to grow into a healthy young being. And in some societies, especially people that are moving around a lot, they can't just leave babies unattended while they're doing their work. And the cradle board was a way of the child would be propped up against a stone or a tree or a wall and be able to see everything that's going on. And they've done studies actually that the wrapping of the child is calming for the child. You would think almost the opposite. People think, oh, but they're all trapped inside the cradle board. But they feel secure in those cradle boards and they are protected from crawling into the fire while the mother is scraping hides or whatever it is that she's doing. And this, I want to say that it's not only women that are disrespected in the histories that we're usually taught, but also certain kinds of social structure and economies. And in the indigenous world, people who foraging means to hunt and to gather. And so they're not necessarily farmers, although they could also be farmers, but there's some traits of these societies that are very important because they tend to value non-aggression. They will reward people who are cooperative with each other, who respect each other, who share. And there are a lot of social protocols in these cultures to reward that and to really kind of just be non-reactive and stay away from people who are confrontational or greedy or violent. And one of the traits of these cultures is that storytelling is more than just an art form, it's actually a way of teaching. And there are a lot of social forms that we could call out like that, the proverbs and many different kinds of communication that are ways of actually communicating values. So one of this image streaked around social media quite a lot because it's highlighting the way that the, oops, what was that? I lost my control panel here. Well, I guess I don't need it. The Inuit societies of the Arctic in Alaska and Canada have child rearing practices that really rely a lot on storytelling because when a child acts out, instead of certainly not striking the child and definitely not hitting the child, but they will not react in a direct way, but they will tell a story. They will use questions like, what do you think that felt like? Or, you know, they'll ask them what's going on with them instead of going straight to punishing. And so they're actually modeling that, you know, mature people show restraint. They don't just act out because of their emotions. And so that's really important. And that's something that is a characteristic of Inuit culture. And so this woman was actually part of a group of people who were teaching anthropologists about these ways of child rearing. And, against shouting, and actually really just saying, maybe talking to the rest of the children and saying, Bobby wants to hit right now. Should he? So it's playful. It's not confrontational. It's not shaming, but it's actually bringing group consensus to bear and saying, the other children will shout out, no, he shouldn't hit, and so then he learns that's not something that we should do. And so the respect, this protocol of respect in Indigenous societies is really basic. Respect for the individual and respect for the group. And there are a lot of proverbs teaching this, and you'll find this in many parts of the world, in Europe too, where people are teaching value of sharing. And there can be spiritual principles behind that. In the Basque country, they say, well, the fairy people really help those who are considerate of others and are not greedy. And so there's these ways of teaching that are passed on organically. They're not formal teaching necessarily. And that's also true of teaching by doing. One of the things that is different from the dominant society that most of us live in, that is different from the Indigenous societies, is that children are part of the community, and that includes doing work, which is appropriate for their age and abilities. And so the older people and even the older children will teach them, and the child will be watching how this is done, how the tortillas are patted out. And they learn by doing, and they begin to feel proud when they too can begin taking on some of these tasks. They become part of it. And so in family life, in many societies around the world, there is this sharing of learning how, in this case, to make pottery together. So this is an economic activity. They're actually selling this pottery in the case of this family in the Canary Islands. But the children learn very young, and they learn to enjoy work. And there can be work songs that are part of this, so that they're talking and they're singing while they're doing all of this. And you will see very young children beginning to take on work. They may also be separate from their mother and walking around the village. And so the child starts to learn from being around other children, and they begin both to play and also to do helping activities inside the family. They're actually doing work. And in the United States, most people would freak out at seeing a little 3-year-old like this with a big sharp old machete in her hands. But they rear children to be responsible. They show them what is expected, and this is not a dangerous thing to do. This is part of learning and growing in these societies. Another really important principle is it's not all just on one mother in a nuclear family. The caregiving of little children is shared out among adults, older children, relatives, and this starts to get to what I describe as social motherhood. In this case, this is not the Congo forest, but you see here, there could be as many 20 people who are responsible for acting as caregiver to the little children and the toddlers. So everybody's watching out for them, so that it's not just one person that's holding that all up. And this community focus on child rearing helps children in all kinds of ways. It helps them actually to be independent, to be interdependent, to work well with others, that they're part of a community from a very young age. They're not separated off in the way that this society does. And so they get to explore the world, and everybody's got an eye on them, but they are allowed free reign, and they're raised in such a way that they're not likely to do some of the dangerous things that you see tightly controlled children doing. And so here in the Aboriginal culture of Australia, they talk about many eyes. So there's all these generations who are all watching out for the young and also for the old and disabled. And they know each other in the community. And so if a child is acting out, so one of those elders, those aunties, or maybe an older sister is going to come around and say, hey, your child is over here and they're about to climb over into this pipe and it's dangerous, better come get him. or they'll do it themselves. So this is social motherhood. This is collective community responsibility. And this makes the child strong. It makes the child capable at a very young age, which helps the survival of the entire community. But you do see the role of elders as teachers. So they're showing the plants, they're telling the children how to prepare things, ways of using tools, what the animals are like, how the land is, how to navigate the land, all these teachings, because this is nature-based. They're not cooped up the way so many of our children are inside indoor communities or with, digital media. And so they're sitting on the land, they're interacting, they're part of the land. And they also have forms of culture, like this is known in English as the cat's cradle. They'll take cords of fiber, and there are whole shapes and formations that they form. As you can see, that multiple people sometimes will be holding the corners. They'll use their mouths, sometimes they'll use their toes, and each of these shapes has a name and stories behind it. This is a way of being able to teach the children about nature and about the community they come from and its history and its wisdom. There's a wisdom sharing, and it's not strictly verbal only, it's interactive. It's using the body, it's using movement. And so there's a lot of nonverbal methods that are used in addition to storytelling in working with children, because they really relate a lot to being in their bodies, being able to make art or sing, play games, sports. All of these activities are something that it is learning, but it's also fun. And they learn to be around each other and with each other through these modalities. And so in each part of the world, the storyteller plays a really important role, whether she's a storyteller for the entire community or whether within her own clan or family, she is the grandmother who is the wise one, and she may be sitting there doing her beadwork, but she's also teaching at the same time. And she's showing the child how to do the beadwork, or she's telling them something about the animals and the way that the seasons go. And so that's all part of storytelling. And this is something here in North America, you have this vast body of oral traditions that are taught. And this is history. It is stories about the world, the way things work. It's stories about behavior and how we should be in the world in order to live in a good way. And so each of these First Nations, here's the Chickasaw, who come from Tennessee in that area. And Chickasaw storyteller working with a drum. And you see this also in China, storytellers in Sichuan beating on a drum while they enact the story. They're not only using words, they're using their bodies or even theater, sounds, expressions in order to bring across what's happening and what does it all mean. And so in Ireland, this is one of the very famous storytellers that used to, not in English, at that time they spoke Gaelic over much of Ireland. This is around the turn of the 1900s. And so Peig Sayers was one of the most famous Shanachis, as they call them in Irish. And fairy stories, all kinds of wisdom and information was conveyed by these storytellers, including history, local history and family history, but also much older, deep history that goes back maybe more than 1,000 years. And I'm showing you the women because I do women's history, but you also see, of course, men participating in all of this social mothering, the caregiving, the storytelling, and all of that. And this is in the pueblos of New Mexico by a woman artist, Pablita Velarde. And we see the storyteller, he's talking about the stars and the star people. And there's a whole creation story that's going on in here too. We've got Spider Grandmother and her webs. And we have the animal beings, the turtle and the bear and coyote and other beings. And so they're really weaving a web of relationship. The child learns they're not separate, or their family and their people are not separate from the animal nations. They're not separate from the land and the waters. And they're taught things about how all these things fit together. And so a lot of important wisdom is carried across this way. And we see this happening through early childhood education in the child care centers. So here the children are sitting on a map of the stars, and they're looking at the Polaris is the star that points from the Big Dipper toward the far north. It's the orientation to the north. Well, this picture gives us a little bit of window because in the Pacific Island cultures, the children are being taught how to navigate using the stars. This also is it's not written down, it's oral, it's all passed on through the voice and through the body. And so very young children begin to learn these things. One of the countries that has the most successful educational system in the world is Finland, up there in Northern Europe, and they are very big on play as learning. They don't even really try to start teaching reading and things like that. They want the child to explore the world, feel confident in themselves, be healthy, and they do use story as well as play. It's just that they see this in a very integrated way that's quite close to what we see in many of the First Nations cultures. And so when they were teaching the children here, they're using art. Everybody gets to create their own piece. This may have been preceded by storytelling, other activities, maybe showing them pictures of things, talking about their own community's history. And then they come up with their paintings and they're collectively putting everything out on a clothesline so that everybody can see what they did and be acknowledged for their own part in this. And visits to museums or other places of learning where the children can expand their awareness of the world. They get to learn, look at all these beautiful things we can do in art. Look at the symbols, they mean things. They can learn about the stories through the symbols. And they learn about art forms. So this is, in this case, it's tile making in Mexico. And you can see they're reaching out to touch or to point. So embodied learning is very important. They're not just sitting in a chair and somebody's talking at them, but they're learning through their bodies. This is pretty old, couple centuries old, from China, and you see the children are playing. They're in a garden, so they're outdoors. She's holding the little baby up here, and the baby is striking a stone chime, which is a very ancient kind of musical instrument in China. And then here the kids are down here playing. There's a pool with carp in it. So they have the fish and, you know, they're playing around and watching the fish. And there's another picture here where they have pets. So they have a bird. There's a little bird here in a cage. And also music is part of this. I see we have a raised hand. So let me figure out here how I can, I'll ask you to unmute. It looks like you have to unmute yourself. I clicked it, but nothing happened. I don't know. If you have a question, which you're welcome to ask or comment, then look on your control panel and there's a little microphone icon. And it should, if it doesn't have a red line through it, it means we can hear you. But if it does have a red line through it, then click on it and then you can talk, okay? And I'm gonna leave it to our moderators to try and unmute people so that they can speak if they want. You're welcome to ask questions. And I somehow lost my chat window. Let me see if I can get that back. So in case people ask something here, I will be able to. Okay, anyway, that's some scenes from China. And here again, we see the drums. So the drum can be used in storytelling, but it's also very commonly used in ceremony, in making music, in dancing. I mean, even in sports, even in gambling games, sometimes the drum is really got a wide range of meanings. This is up from the Pacific Northwest in probably Western Canada, maybe Alaska. And so that's something, I mean, these are some things to think about also, of some things you can bring in that the child can explore the world. They can explore sound by playing on a drum and maybe have that demonstrated also, the things that can be done with the drum. You know, some of the cultural styles that they can experience for themselves and learn about the world. Here you can see that they have a whole context of cultural riches around them with the art is there. They've got dream catchers on the wall, cultural teachers. They're sitting in a circle, which is always a great way to teach. Everybody sees everybody and is present together. And so then another aspect, and this is something that would have been normal and natural in indigenous societies, historically over the vast majority of human history, is that the old teaching the young. There's a special bond where very young people and very old people, the old people may not be doing the work that they used to do in time, but they are able to be the instructors of the young. They have a lot of patience with them. And there's a really symbiotic relationship of that allows them to be teachers and counselors and guides for the youth. And there are a couple projects that have been started in different countries to co-house very old people with childcare centers so that the old people are not isolated anymore, and the young people get the benefit of the attention and the care that the old people have to offer, as well as their wisdom. And so this, I want to talk a little bit because single mothers, mothering sometimes in many political contexts, social contexts is very difficult because they do carry the whole load. And the children carry it too, because here the little boy is having to carry firewood. And these are women, maybe homeless even, they're carrying everything on their backs. This is in the Maya country of Guatemala. And you have also unhoused families whose numbers are growing. I mean, they've been growing, and now we have the pandemic, and it's even harder for people to survive. And so the struggle to survive, it's still, somehow those children have to learn. They have to learn to survive for themselves, and they have to learn to stay safe in this world. And so this is something to be aware of, because a lot of the children who come into our child care centers may be coming out of situations that are very insecure. They don't have shelter. They may also have either a history of or actually having to do work. Child labor in many parts of the world is they don't get the benefit of schooling because they're out there earning a living, because they have to. Their families can't provide that for them. And we know there's a whole history of this with slavery in the United States. And here we're looking at African-American children, but this was also done to Native children in California, right here in California. This was an official enslavement that was carried out by the state, by the governor. And we have child labor also of poor children in many parts of this country being forced. These are corn shuckers in South Carolina, and these girls are forced to work for 12-hour days, sometimes on night shifts in the cotton mills. And this was the life for a lot of children who were deprived. You have also children who survived war and all the atrocities of war and the attempts of the mothers or any adults around, nurses sometimes, to protect them and to comfort them and to support them in continuing to live and to move on from these hardships of having to work from the age of 5 or 6 in some cases. And so we have children coming across the border who are coming out of these kinds of hardships. Another thing to be aware of is children who have survived sexual trauma, who may still be living with sexual abuse or physical abuse, emotional abuse within their families or within the places where they are forced to live. And that goes back to often to the homelessness. Their mothers may be working and not able to supervise them. And so a lot of the children who are acting out inside of these childcare situations have this going on. They're lashing out. They don't really know. They have issues where they might have outbursts, or they're not paying attention. They can't really relate to other children. They're all withdrawn inside of themselves. And so you'll see them, the fear in them, or sometimes the aggression because of, I used to work in a school in East Oakland, and this little boy was acting out in class, and I worked in the principal's office. And so he came in there and I was talking to him, and it came out that his mother's boyfriend was beating up on her. And this is why he was acting out in class. He was very distressed. He was in pain. And so we have to think about how we can make it work for those kids. You know, they need nurturing, they need recognition, they need calm, they need security, some way that we can supply security for them. And sometimes that might be through breathing or other activities that can reassure them. What happened to my cursor? It's not all of a sudden. There we go. And other needs that we have to consider is children with disabilities, how they can be included, how they can be part of the group, but at the same time, their needs can be addressed, whether it's through sight or mobility. They may be members of a deaf community. They may have developmental issues that make it hard for them to follow things that other children have no problem doing. And so we have to think about ways to adapt, to be able to help those children be part of the world, part of their learning environment. And we have to think also not about reinforcing very strict gender roles on children. So girls are discouraged very often from speaking as much as boys do, and boys are shamed if they burst into tears. And this kind of enforcement is harmful to all the children, and some more so than others if they are gender nonconforming. Or perhaps if the child has a lesbian or gay parent, they will catch flack from other children. So the caregivers have to think as social mothers how to make a safe space for all the children in their community. And, you know, bullying has been named many times as a problem. And, you know, I'm no expert on this, and many of you have dealt with this, but this is something part of the indigenous mind teachings, is how to cooperate, showing children ways of doing that, ways of resolving conflict. That's really important. A responsibility of caregivers to be able to show that. You model it, you show it. And the part that caregivers play is so important in these children's lives. You're actually opening up their possibilities. They may be coming from very stressful situations and families, a lot of poverty and hardship. You know, they may be moving around a lot and they have no security. And it's the caregivers sometimes, because, you know, the mother or the father, whoever who's caring for them, may be overwhelmed themselves. And so you're in a position to really aid them and to open up possibilities in their mind and give them tools and ways of seeing their way out of that, being able to become themselves in very difficult circumstances. So I really pay respect here to the caregivers and the skills that you have, because you all know a lot of this stuff, but I'm trying to show this, you know, to just as an overview of the things that you're already doing. And, you know, we're all for the idea that you should all be paid well for what you do. It's important. It's crucial to society. It needs to be recognized. And I hope someday we'll get to the point where you will get that recompense for what you offer, what you offer society. And that includes benefits, not just the pay. I'm going to stop for a minute because here I've been going on and I forget to pause. And so I want to see, we can actually stop screen sharing if people want to, but if anybody has a question now, if you want to unmute yourself or comment, or you can type into chat. And I'm going to just look here for a moment and see. Yes, Binda says, even with our modern advances in comforts, teachers are constantly pressured to do developmentally appropriate things and enforce racist and homophobic, and I would say sexist, rules on young children. So, like, you know, that kind of policing of behavior, we don't want those kinds of harms. We want something that's very, very rounded and generous, really, with the children. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'll continue unless somebody, your last chance here to say something at this
Matt,
moment.
no other question, but Brooke did make a comment that I was curious if you knew more about, that they've heard some interesting research in regards to the Inuit community and how children read and learn eye language due to
Uh-huh.
mouths being covered
Yeah,
because of the cold, and now
right.
not being utilized due to mask wearing. So thinking about
Interesting.
yeah,
Yes, yes. Yeah, eye language and also tone of voice, right? Uh, yeah, because here we are with the masks. And I think there's a really hard impact on children because of the isolation that all the kids have been subjected to during the necessary protocols to prevent the spread of the disease. You know, I don't know how many of you are currently working in childcare centers or how to what degree they're closed down, but I think there's going to be a lot of kids coming back into centers, which maybe they will have forgotten to a large degree how to relate to, especially groups of other children. Yeah. So, the mothers, I want to come back to the mothers because a lot of times it is the mother who's holding the whole thing up and she has no one to help her. She may not have an extended family. She may be isolated from that. She may be, just dealing with everything and trying to work and take care of her children without childcare. Very, very difficult. And we know that there have been movements like the Black Panthers had the Oakland Community School, which was not only for childcare, but it was really geared toward empowerment of the mothers, the community, and the children, that they would be given an education that was appropriate for their needs, that supported them, that gave them, that mirrored back their capacities in their community in a really positive way, because that is something that has been systematically deprived for lots of children from many different ethnic communities. And the support for the mothers, because many mothers are working, they're in school, sometimes both. I don't know how they do it, or else they're dealing with crisis situations, whether that's economic or homelessness or abuse on the mothers themselves. And so that's another factor to take into account. And while I was making this presentation, I found this Mothering Justice organization. Mutual support and is really important. And it's true not only for the mothers, but I think also for the caregivers with the responsibilities and the stresses that you face in the work that you do. But they talk here about maternal justice. So this is one organization, I'm not even really sure where they're based, but addressing this. And here we see this coming from the Chicana community, where they want to affirm the strengths of their own culture. And you are basically, they have this term again of rematriate that I haven't talked about that yet. I guess I'm going to come around to this in a moment. Thank you. Okay. And so this is an issue for women out of the First Nations communities. This is a woman in Oaxaca, Mexico, where she is having to deal with work and motherhood, and she's also active for her community. Here in I'm not in Oakland anymore, but in the Bay Area in Oakland, we have the Lisan Ohlone people. And here's this word rematriate, which means to return. There's a word that repatriate means to restore something to the father country. But rematriate here means the mother country. So it's sort of saying restore to the mother, restore the authority of the mother, the power of the mother. Recognition for mothering is really crucial to this. We have a moving problem with the Chinese translation. Here it maybe needs to move into the other room. Uh, and anyway, so this is a recovery of land for the Lisan Ohlone people here in the Bay Area. And this is one of their slogans, rematriate and land back. They are beginning to rebuild a land base of everything that was taken away from them. Because to have a community, to have an economy, you have to have land. You have to have self-determination. And so this is something that they have been building, and they are using all the things I've been talking about here with dance and ceremony and storytelling and learning the language, returning back to the ancestral language, and many other things besides that. And so they're doing this, and it's an indigenous women-led community, this Sogorea Te Land Trust. And this is happening all over North America, here in Minnesota with the drum circle, and you have the youth participating, the emphasis being on passing on all this knowledge, including the language and the ceremonies, to the young people. And art is really important with this too, because the children both need to experience art coming out of their heritages or of other people's heritages to learn what the world tastes like, what it looks like, but also to do the art themselves. And so mural projects, there is Verdi School here we worked with in Richmond, and they're making murals on the walls of the school. And so that it's a participation where they are actually co-creating community. And we can see changes over time. This is in northern Canada, which is now called Nunavut. This is a name for the indigenous sovereign country in the Arctic part of North America. And this is 100 years ago. You can see the kind of clothing that they're wearing. And this is in Greenland, actually, this picture. So varieties of style, but this beautiful culturally specific art that is created by the mothers in these communities. And the children have this ongoing connection to their own culture. And this is something that we need to share with all the children. Not only the African children need to know about the beauties of the Kung culture in Botswana or any other African culture, but all the children need to see the range of humanity, of what these other societies look like. This is all jewelry that's made with ostrich shell beads, and they have these beautiful garlands made out of flowers on their heads. Of course, there are all these cultural recovery movements that have been going on since the 60s and even before, recovery of Yoruba traditions, Igbo traditions in Nigeria, for example, and restoring cultural modes of dress, of music, of ceremony. This is all ongoing. The children are part of this. The intention is to pass it on. And this is something that has moved also into the European American communities to rediscover and decolonize the history of Europe and to look at the positive traditions that exist there, which Europeans share with the entire rest of the world. The dancing, the drumming, the ethnic clothing, the beadwork, all of this is something that is there to be recovered, and an identity that is other than whiteness, something that goes back to the deep cultural roots. And that is also a remedy against cultural appropriation. So this is interesting because it is the Madonna. This is a Christian image of the Madonna as a mother who shelters not just children, but the adults too, under her mantle of mercy. And I just pulled this in at the last minute because look at this. This is a matrilineal people in northern Colombia, the Wayuu people. And this same gesture of the mantle, the woman holds this mantle around her children. This is a cultural gesture of protection and support from the mother. This is in a society that honors women and the powers of women. And here you see her also dancing with this mantle and holding it out almost like wings in that society. So I want to look just for a moment, because I was asked to touch on this, at what I call matricultures. And matriarchal societies, you'll see them called matriarchies. There's a lot of different names for societies which are egalitarian, but they're centered around the mother because the mothers are at the center of human societies as the bearers of life and the ones who care for the young. And cultures that are based on support of life tend to have this focus. You know, they're not about war, it's about community, it's about cooperation and sharing. So I'm going to just share you a little bit about this. So the term comes from this root in Latin, which means womb, the place where children come from, and also the word mother. So matriarchy means the origin from the mother. And so what are these societies like? They trace descent in the mother line. This is the word matrilineal. They tend to have families living around the woman's family. So she's not far away from her relatives where her husband can beat her up if he feels like it. Her brothers and sisters are right there nearby. And so she's more protected. And the children don't lose their home because the father leaves, because there they are right there with the motherkin. So there are very concrete reasons why this makes sense. They are egalitarian societies, so they're sex egalitarian, and also they tend not to be ranked societies. So there's not the important rich people up here and then the poor people who are despised down there. They are equal. The social unit is built on kinship. So it's sister and brother is the main linkage, not husband and wife, because that's a legal tie. But we're talking about a tie through the mother. And that tie results in the entire family sharing the land and the house together. So a lot of times you'll see a long house where it's a collective grouping of kin. And this social motherhood that I've been touching on, this is a really important fact because all the sisters and all the brothers are social mothers to the children. They are even counted. They will even be addressed as mothers, even though technically they're not the birth mother. And so there's this collective responsibility that's very important. The grandmothers, the female elders, are important in these societies. They aren't squirreled away in a corner somewhere. They are leaders. They are guides. They are decision making. You will see women as ceremonial leaders. You will see goddesses or other forms of female ancestors. Gender roles are not rigid, so that men, when they go out to hunt, know how to cook, and women, when they're left on their own, know how to defend their family and can hunt themselves if they need to. And so non-aggression, cooperation, there's a lot of factors that go into these societies. And although we're using this word matriculture, which is, an English word from Latin, there are names in Sumatra. The Adat Ibu means the mother-in-law. In South India, the Maru Makatayam means sisters' children. This is their name for their social system. In the South Pacific, the way of the ancestors. Indonesia, the path of life. And a lot of times the names for clans in these societies have to do with children who drink milk from the same breast or from a same group of sisters. And this makes them relatives, even if they are not blood relatives. This is also how you make kin. So if a family decides to adopt someone, a stranger who comes among them and they like them and they want them to be part of the family, they will put that man or woman to the breast of one of the old women. And that symbolically makes him or her kin. And these are all terms from different languages that refer to the matriline, children coming from a single womb, children of the same mother or the same mother line. And in material culture, you'll see a recognition of this. These majestic statues are placed at the very top of the tall houses that the Bapende people build in the Congo. And so they're called kishi kishi, these statues of the ancestral mother. In Eastern Indonesia also, you have these luli altars, and they represent the ancestral woman. In this case, we even have her name, which is pretty unusual to actually get this much information. But she is the founding mother of this particular village. There's art from people here in North America, the Cherokee, the Muskogean peoples, that reclaims their social system. And these are matrilineal societies, the Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Pueblos, many of the societies. She speaks for her clan. She is a spokeswoman. She has a social authority. She has public authority as a mother in her community. And these little masks that you see above everyone, we've got the wolf and the bear, various beings here. These represent the clan. So the Turtle Clan or whatever. So it's a collectivity of mothers that work together. And this is the late Floyd Crow Westerman, who from the Lakota tradition talks about how the clan mothers were the final word. They are the guides. They are the ones who are least likely to go off on ego trips and do things that could harm the society. They're thinking about the seventh generation ahead and guiding according to those collective principles of the community's well-being. But anyway, I'm not going to give you this whole show, but I just wanted to share some images because in every part of the world, we have had these matricultural societies. And you see the women carrying their children with them as they go about gathering wood or working in the fields. What's really interesting is that some of these societies, I mentioned before about gender roles. This is the man who is chopping up food for dinner. He's cooking and he has the baby strapped on his back. There really are societies like this where men care for their children and they don't, it doesn't bother them to do the childcare and think that somehow they are emasculated by doing that. The woman here is in the background chopping up banana leaves. It's really important for children to know that even when we all grow up in a society that has these very severe sex roles, that not everybody has lived like this. There are a whole range of different societies, and that motherhood is also linked to invention and technological prowess, learning how to plant and harvest and store food and how to weave and spin and make baskets and how to fire pottery and paint it and all the cultural work that goes along with this weaving and this ceramic art, the passing on of spiritual principles that's done through this. Or even when they go to pick the clay and they bring the children with them, they may make an offering to the clay mother. She's part of Mother Earth. And it's like, thank you, we're going to take some clay and we're going to make these pots. Thank you for the clay. So the children learn through every activity of daily life. And this is what we need to transmit somehow, is to let children, especially the ones who don't have that in their homes or their communities, to taste the richness of the world cultures, all the beautiful regalia that the Aztec dancers here are wearing, the kinds of dancing and drumming and songs and ceremony that exist. That's something that they need to be able to see. And we have video and other tools that make it easier for us to share and let the kids explore the world, like these old frescoes. This is from an island near Crete in the Mediterranean. It shows girls gathering flowers, and these are saffron. It's the crocus flower, and this little part of the crocus flower they're gathering in baskets because it was a food and a medicine, and it was used also as a paint in ceremony. So Crete has some very interesting images of egalitarian culture, of women and men living peacefully together. It's not a military society. And you can see the little girls here participating. She's got the flower in her hand, participating in the ceremony together. And we could go around the world like this, looking at things that women do that, in some parts of the world, we were taught, oh no, the women never drum. There's a whole vast history of women drummers. And this is very late, from Iran in the 1700s, but we've got images in archaeology that go back thousands of years before this, not just in Iran, but all over Western Asia and Central Asia and Siberia and North America and South America, of these women drummers. And I think that ultimately, we need to really, in the cultural enrichment, it's interesting to children to look and have somebody tell them, this is 7,000 years ago. And look, they have a leopard, they have the snow leopard, and it's the animal that has the longest tail. And, you can tell stories to them about the animals because they love stories about animals. And to see how people in different parts of the world, look how similar these are, one from Vietnam and the other from Argentina, where you've both people separately, without any relation to each other, created frog pots. And there are pots like this of many different other kinds of animals in places like Missouri and different parts of the world, Egypt. So kids like to look at these patterns. You could have them copy this, paint this, just to be able to be exposed to and study this beautiful ceramic art from Central America. And you've got the animal heads and the little, this is a person, it looks like a person, but it's got animal ears, looks like maybe a bear, something. Drums that are made in the form of the jaguar, all carefully modeled and painted. They like seeing this stuff. It's like, then you could have them show them this stuff and have them paint something themselves. They might get ideas from it. You know, it expands their awareness in ways that are good for their minds and good for their spirits. The spiral art, and I could do a whole thing on this. If you just do a Google search for spirals, you'll find examples of pottery like this all over the world from very ancient times. Look at the date on that. And the recovery also of more recent history, because many people were taught, they weren't taught African history, and they didn't know that these beautiful ivory carvings of queens existed. There are 5 different ivories like this that come from Eastern Nigeria in this ancient city of Benin, and bronzes, and there's so many other cultural riches. So this is something that it enriches the children, because we don't want them to grow up in a culturally shallow world where all they have is the cartoon characters that are available to them from digital media. They need to see the riches, and that allows them to stand somewhere, stand on their own feet, and see where they are in relation to the entire history of humanity. And they too have a place in that. So that's what I have here to share with you today. I invite you to visit the website here, suppressedhistories.net, and also I didn't put this in here, the Max Dashu YouTube channel. I'll write that in chat. But one place that you can look for some of the resources I've been talking about is to visit Suppressed Histories Archives on Facebook. And especially if you go into the photos section, you can scroll down and find examples of the kind of stuff you would like to share with your children. As far as I'm concerned, this is all open source. So you can download the images, you can tell them the stories, or you can do something else with it. You could even print it out and have the children assemble collages. You could make a mural together for the wall in the child care center using the images, and give them a chance to be able to experience all of this. So again, thanks to ECESF for inviting me. And now, oops, I had a few extras that I threw in here. I'm going to stop the screen share so we can just go to the group. And I'm going to take a look at the comments and see if there's anything here. But again, unmute yourself if you want to speak. I'm done for now.
Brooke, you had a direct question. I thought you might want to open up and ask that yourself, or I could call it out.
Hey Max, yeah, I just put in the chat, as you were talking about matrilineal societies and mothers, I was just really thinking about what you know about non-binary or trans or whatever terminology that society would be utilizing around third gender, quote unquote, and what you know about, how accepted or what role folks with those identities held in matrilineal societies.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to generalize, but I think I will anyway, which is that because there are such less rigid gender roles in these societies, there's a lot more flexibility. And sometimes you do have named categories. I don't have this information for all the societies I've studied. I'm still researching this. One of the things that's interesting about it is they do have 3rd, 4th, and 5th categories. So their interpretation of gender is different from some of what we're seeing now, because they are saying there are these other categories, and they don't try to deny the sexed body, but they say, be who you are, whatever that is. So they have trans women categories, they have trans men categories, they have non-binary categories, depending on the culture. Sometimes you will see less recognition of that kind of gender mobility for females than for males in some societies. And I'm talking generally here, not just about the matrilineal societies, because I don't have that information aggregated yet, separated, but I'm speaking generally about indigenous societies, which have various forms of recognizing this. What you see happening is that the third gender, fourth gender people will participate in activities that resonate with them, so that you will say have what corresponds to trans women, like in the Lakota culture, you have Winyan, which means women, and then you have Winkte, which means like a woman. It was contraction, but basically that's what it means. And so the Winkte will assist the women in their work, and they are actually a support to women. And this is an accepted thing. It's just integrated into the society. And you don't see the same kind of conflict because it is, it's expansive. There's a lot more to be learned about this. One of the things that I'm studying this so far, what I've seen is that it varies a lot. The kinds of names that are given, the kinds of categories that exist vary. So what we call trans as a single category can be many different kinds of categories, depending on who the person is in various indigenous societies. I'll give you an example so you see what I mean. And maybe you would call this non-binary, but I've read accounts of Lakota men. They don't stop calling themselves men. They still marry women. They still do men's work, but they may have a dream that when they go to battle or whatever the activity is, maybe making medicine, that they wear women's clothing and dress their hair in a women's manner. But the rest of their life, they may not do that at all. So that's one example of how it can vary. It isn't, other people will live their entire life in this third gender. And sometimes they will do that and then they will change and they're not doing it anymore. So it's quite diverse. And this is something that I'm still studying to learn more about.
Thank you so much, Max.
Yes, thank you. I invite anyone else that may have had questions. There were some great comments in the chat, but not many follow-up questions. So we welcome anyone to come unmute and ask anything now.
If you're too shy, you can just type it in, you know.
Yeah, that's of course welcome.
While people are waiting to talk, I just think it's so important. I feel like this society has an increasingly more shallow depth of understanding of all the people that came before us. You know, speaking generally about US society, young people are less and less likely to know. And that exception to that, of course, is all the efforts to decolonize and to restore awareness of ancestral heritages. But it's, I think there's a real lack there because that isolation from the heritages also means that they lose the wisdom, they lose the connection, and that connection to earth that's so important, and the way that people related to earth, and the ways people did ceremony, and the ways that the technologies even that people had of how do you survive? You know, how do you survive when the food supply is disrupted? Now what do you do? You know, the children need that. They need that knowledge.
There are a couple of great comments that I just want to shout out, and the makers of the comments, if you want to, speak out more about it. But I really appreciate Binda Magic a number of times. I'm just looking at one that says, "Tell it, Max. It's incredible how logical and sensible and beautiful such a societal perspective is, and how far from the mainstream has strayed in an ugly and dark way. Patriarchal culture." So this is when you were talking about matra culture.
Yeah.
And that it harms men as much as women and children. And then Brooke, I think, followed that. I think it came after that, maybe just before, when you were talking about the, I forget exactly how, the milk mothers, the connection of everyone through having milk from the same breast. And Brooke commented about thinking about that in terms of a wet nurse. And that just really made me respond about some of the very same things we could do now, but if done without respect and power and seeing it as a servile thing rather than a life-giving thing, can turn the very same thing into something that is without power. And so to me, that's just very powerful, that the things we're doing are strong and important, but not seen as so, and that takes the power away.
That's a really important point. The devaluing, the devaluing because it's what women do and women are devalued, and we see this also in the job market. What women do is devalued. You have, they say you have to be twice as good as the man, or, people of color have to be twice as good as the white people. There's all these biases that are built in. And it's like there's some kind of deep way. This is where teaching is so important, is to restore a possibility in the mind of the young people. I can be this. What I do is important. What my mother does is important. What women do is important. What caregivers do is important, whether they're male, female, or whatever. It's ultimately culture teaches values. Stories teach values. History teaches values. The movies often teach very destructive values. And we have a lot of girls who are growing up thinking that it's only about how they look, and they think that's what power is. And conversely, these really destructive behaviors, all these war movies and all of these suspense films that are really based on violence. Children's attention is caught by those things, and they think that's what they're shown, so that's how they think the world is. And that's a terrible deprivation for those children. We need to show them something more. Any other reactions? Something that stood out for you? Is everybody in the same room now, or are we still doing translation?
We are still translating, yes. So I would love to give opportunity if there are any participants that would like their question translated, maybe.
Yeah.
I can share. My name is Merced Rocha. What is stood out for me is when you show the image, how I think that's part of the indigenous cultures. I'm from Oaxaca, so I'm part of those indigenous cultures. And when you say that learning by doing it, when you're observing, yes, in the farm, you observe. I grew up observing how things were done, and how we're like you said, the elders teach the younger ones, or the grandmothers teach the grandkids. It's like a familiar circle that everybody learns naturally without, I mean, you do, like I learned how to do work in a farm like naturally by observing. Nobody taught me what to do or how to do it. It's only observing. So that is like throw me back in my childhood and say, yes, I'm a teacher here, and I love to teach the children. So I'm working with the infant and toddlers, but I love to be like hands-on activities. But I think as a teacher, we need to make sure that we have a little bit of the natural based teaching to the children, to hands-on, like play with the soil, water the plants,
Yes.
something like that, to be in contact with the environment, with the natural, because that seems like with technologies, everything is lost about that thing. And like you say, it's part of growing, and how we need to teach the children to be more realistically and find where the food comes from, where where all the things that we have come from. So that will be like thank you for sharing all that, because it's connected to the culture and make me reflect. Yes, I need to think that when I'm working with the children, how I'm going to incorporate a little bit of that, in my activities that I plan for them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what you said is so important about nature, because I have personally known children who were neighbors who did not have any contact with nature. They never got to sit under trees or run through fields or any of that. They only could play on the sidewalk and the street, and it was all structured games, like video games and things, but they didn't get to just explore the land. They were cut off from that. And I don't know in a childcare situation what kinds of possibilities exist. I mean, you're probably indoors most of the time, but figuring out ways to give children a chance to experience the wonder in nature is so important. We're so cut off in this society from that.
I just wanted to share, I really like the perspective and just the point of view of having children be part of the conflict resolution and being part of, making rules that work for them.
Yeah.
I had a group of older boys that, really enjoy the fact that we're having to spray their hands with a spray bottle all the time. And so they decided they wanted to play with spray bottles. And I was like, okay, great. We brought out and of course, they first start spraying each other, and rather than saying, well, we don't really want you to get wet today, for whatever reason, I just had them gather around and say, all right, what's going to be the plan? What are the rules with the spray bottles? And then they decided well, they were going to attack the slide and it was going to be a robot. And they just decided they were going to spray a whole lot of other things that I didn't have to give them the ideas. They could come up with it themselves. And it wasn't like I needed to direct them in a certain way. It was just letting them express what they thought was going to work for them. And they just were able to figure it out. So I was really happy about that. Just trusting in them that we give them enough guidance, but if we trust in their decision-making, then they can help solve their own problems if they ever have one.
That's really brilliant. I like that a lot. I mean, making them resolve it amongst themselves. And this reminds me of something my mom used to do. If there was a pie to be divided, the child that cut the pie was the one that had to choose the last piece. So you never saw children try so hard to make the pieces be exactly the same size as that cutter would be, just like she knew she was going to get the smallest piece. So come on, y'all, don't be shy. Any other thoughts about all this?
Well, I'll just second what you just said, Max, about nature and kids getting outside. And everybody knows this and everybody's heard it from me. But we are so lucky to live in San Francisco, where across the entire city, there are parks and nature and in your own, and of course on your own doorstep and bush and patch of grass, there's nature. And so I'm overwhelmed by all the many things that could be done, should be done. I wish we could do to put the brakes on the academic boot camp of preschool that's happening and how things are going. But if nothing else, we can every time we're with a kid, we can let them freely enjoy nature and without definitions and limits. So thanks.
It's like when it's possible, and I don't know how possible this is for all of you to make a trip to a park, that's really great. But what I remember as a kid is even puddles. It's like what you said about the spray bottles. Kids are fascinated by water and puddles and my mom used to take a bucket and we'd stick our feet in and make footprints on the sidewalk, and we'd be entertained for hours doing this, and so those are all really sometimes very simple things.
Yeah, that's right. I just want to say about that too. In my center, for example, children, we have trees, little plants, flowers. They're always observing and looking under the racks and looking for roly-poly. So any little boxes in there. and they play with them, they stretch them, they observe them. I love it. And also, I'm from Peru. I'm coming from the mountains, so I used to play in my childhood with baby animals, pigs or lambs, and I told that story to the children during the nap or descanso, or sometimes we are playing in the backyard, and they love it. They always asking, could you tell me the story about the volcano? Could you tell me the story about the river, about the eagle? What happened? What happened to the pig? So it's very nice to pass your culture or pass your stories, the childhood, and they love it, and they will be remembered. So, and we cook together. Well, now with the pandemic, we're not cooking, but we used to cook a lot with like making anything for the snack, like a beans or pizza or just from scratch, like a pesto pasta. And there's a girl who is now like 10 years old. Sometimes when I see on the street, they say, Trini, could you make pesto pasta, or you can teach my mom how to do it? And the mom say, I do, but it's never the same as you did. It's because she help. That's why I said, that's true. Everybody help. It's very good. Thank you. I really like all you explain about nature, the women, the power, music, the drums. Like, yeah, that's how they teach the kids every day. Thank you so much.
I have a question for you all. Do you work with clay at all? Is that something that you do in your programs?
Yeah, we do. We do clay, and also we made our own Play-Doh with flour, and the kids put hands on. And also we do the flower with different color, and they just, just play, because as long they play with like the sensory. And also it's very important, sand and water every day in the backyard, even during the rainy days. And I say, sand is wet today. Could we skip the water? And they say, no, we need water.
They want to stamp in the puddles.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, but they cook, and they are mixing up a lot. And, I think they also cooking like they're at home. I think pretty much they know and help them, probably the families, but they do. It's very surprise for me. They do so many dishes, from just cookies and very elaborate dishes. It's wonderful. Yeah, it is wonderful.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, now that everyone has started speaking, I don't want to tell everyone that it's almost 8 o'clock, but it is. So
Time goes so fast.
it does. I just want to thank you so much, Max, for your incredible visuals and stories. It's just so beautiful to watch. And I shared with you an email, but I'll share with everyone here. I have a 20-year-old who doesn't usually join me for documentaries. Sometimes he does documentaries, things like that. But when he watched Max's presentation on anti-racism and history of racism, he was completely blown away and was going to share it with all his 20-year-olds. So I'll share that with you as well. And so I've been super excited to share these stories with you as well. So beautiful. And yes, rematriate. Before we close, a few things. First, we'd love to take a picture of all of you before we close. So if you want to be part of the picture, turn your cameras on and smile. And we've learned from some staging that we have to give you a warning. So we're going to say 1, 2, 3, smile. Anna is going to take a few more over the next few minutes, but also I want to tell you, second, that we'd love to hear from you, what your takeaway from tonight's presentation is. So we will be emailing you and hear more, and we'll definitely save the chat. Love to hear all your stories and responses. Remember to take the chat links with you, and yes, we'll send you a follow-up with the links. And then also we're looking forward to working with you more in the future, and want to remind you that the Week of the Young Child, you probably need no reminder, is coming up April 10th through 16th. And Worthy Wage Day is on May 1st. And we'll be reaching out to you for some social media and hope you'll help us spread it all around. Someday we'll get back together again in large groups, but we're not quite ready for that yet. And we will ongoingly connect you to or create with you other important community and educator conversations, actions, and happenings. So we'd love to hear your ideas of what you'd like those to look like and be. Let us know what you're doing. Powerful, connected educators in the strength we need to come together will be what moves things forward. So great having all of you here tonight and making this a great event. Thank you all, and happy Pay Equity Day from now through, what was the Latina Day? Is it October? We will just have to call out every one of those. I'll have to look back at the link. Thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank you.